Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. Mike, great to see you, sir. Fun one for us to dive into today. We're going to talk the legacy of probably the most controversial comic book creator of all time. Certainly one of the most well renowned, depending on who you ask. He's either the greatest that's ever written a comic and a legend, or the destroyer and the worst thing to ever happen to comics. We're going to talk Alan Moore today, and I think he's a creator that you and I have very complex thoughts on in terms of. I think we can both admit he's had some absolute genius in his storytelling, but his legacy may not be the best. So before I dive in on my thoughts on it, Mike, I'm just going to kick it to you to start. The legacy of Alan Moore as a creator. Do you think he was a good thing or a bad thing for the comic book industry?
I think, I think you could go down both paths. Um, Alan Moore will forever, you know, be looked at as one of the greatest of all time. There's nothing that could take that away from him. His his work speaks for itself. He showed tremendous potential in the UK and always dreamed of coming, I think, to America to work for the big two. And in the 80s, DC was trying to branch out, and they had Karen Berger over there in England looking for new talent and brought a few people over. And Alan, although he wasn't one of the original ones, he was one of the second wave of talent that Karen brought over, if I remember that correctly. And he was just, he was born to write for comic books, and of course other things too. He was just a great writer. He's one of the things that, and we'll talk about, you have to be able to separate the art from the artist sometimes. I love his stories. I love his run on Swamp Thing. I absolutely love The Watchmen. My other favorite is From Hell that he did,
Mm-hmm.
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen,
No, V
um,
for Vendetta. I mean, there's a
V
lot of
for
good stories.
Vendetta, and Promethea, which is one of my favorites, which is kind of underrepresented of Alan Moore's one. Maybe it's lesser known works, but I love that comic. So, in a lot of respects, he helped elevate comics in an era where they seemed to be struggling. And Karen Berger was that was part of her mission to reinvigorate and go out and find new talent. And that opened a door for him and several others, Dave Gibbons and several others, to come into the main market, which was the United States. So his talent is unquestionable. But you and I have, and of course we did the Watchmen recently, and we're talking about books that may rival that, some graphic novels.
Hmm.
Because, but the thing about Alan is he raised the bar for everybody. Um, and some of his darker themes, you and I both are in agreement, went way too far, the other people that followed him. But Alan Moore set the stage for all that to happen, and the expansion into an adult format, which at times went too far, I think, because the ultimate trick of writing a good comic book is something that can be appreciated, like the Pixar movies. It can be appreciated by kids and adults. In other words, it's more of a universal story, and that's when I think comics shine the most. Although, don't get me wrong, I had fun, reading From Hell and all of that, and that's definitely not for kids. And The Watchmen is definitely not for
For
kids either.
kids.
But the platform, the stage was set, and he was. he was the one who set the stage.
So I'm going to isolate Watchmen out of this conversation in that it's hard to do that with Alan Moore.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever affect how I see Watchmen, though. It's a great story. I believe it's fundamentally one of the greatest comic book stories ever, maybe the greatest comic story ever. It's a masterpiece. It really is. But I will say, and I like V for Vendetta quite a bit. But I will say, I think Alan Moore ended up being a net negative on comic books because I don't know that he ever had a love for the characters in the medium that he was writing. And I think that negativity, like you mentioned, the deconstruction that he started a little bit of ended up, I think, putting us on a really dark path with comics where the biggest thing that you and I have bemoaned about comic books is the loss of kids as the intended audience of comics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think without question, Alan Moore put us on that path. Now you
Oh, yeah.
can blame the editorial, and certainly they have. It's not he's not by himself, right? But he seemed to be the tip of the spear that led the charge on that. And what I'll say is, he doesn't seem to be someone who ever actually had any love for the Batmans and the Supermans and the Spider-Mans and the different characters that have made up these colorful universes. And I think the other part that's frustrating with him is he doesn't even really seem to like his own works that led to that anyway. And so you, in one sense, have this guy who absolutely able to tell a brilliant story in Watchmen. And again, nothing, regardless of my personal feelings on him, that's a masterpiece. But I do think he's been a net negative and pushed the industry to a level it didn't need to be. And while he can't take all the blame for that, because certainly there's been dozens of years and hundreds of writers and executives who did not have to go that path, it is a little bit hard to separate that. I kind of compare him to Kevin Feige with the MCU. And here's what I mean by that. Part of why the MCU succeeded was Kevin Feige, right? His original vision for Iron Man and Captain America and more comic book accurate superheroes and a little bit of fun and connected universe stuff put superhero movies on the map in a way they'd never been before, right? Because we've had some previously isolated stuff like Superman in 78 and Batman in 89 and the McGuire Raimi trilogy. But an interconnected universe that rivaled the comic books had never been done before. The issue is Kevin Feige is probably also the individual who's going to destroy the superhero movie with what the MCU's become. And so it's an interesting legacy for him in that part of why we ever had a connected universe of 20 different films is that guy. Part of why the whole thing might die is also going to be that guy. And I think that's partly Alan Moore is part of why we got some of the classics that we got when we got them is Alan Moore. But he also is probably part of the reason why this industry went the way that it did and fell as much as it did. He's just a complex figure. He's a complex figure.
He really is. I will say that I think Alan, um, just judging from his work, obviously I don't know him. But I think, he wanted to write what he wanted to write, and he wanted to use the medium of comic books to write it in. And when he worked in that medium, he was masterful.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think he really had a love for traditional superhero storytelling, but he didn't need to because there was a whole industry that was
Oh,
doing
that.
that kind of thing. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, and what he did was amazing. I think he was always at odds with the industry for one thing or another, because the industry was this monster, machine that was going in this one direction, which is, what he fell in love with as a kid and what we fell in love with as a kid. But as a writer, I think there were, in his mastermind, he probably, was ready to step outside of that. And this is the medium that he was constrained in.
Mhm.
So he did what he did the way he did it. He told these brilliant stories through this medium, which has always been denigrated and looked down on as lesser than. And
Mhm.
here's this, literary genius who's stepping into it and did amazing things. But you're also absolutely right. The writers that tried to follow him down that path, A, they weren't Alan Moore, and B, it was a fun little gimmick that I think they got stuck in for 30 years. And I don't think it served the genre very well. You and I are in agreements with that. But I wouldn't put that on Alan. Like
Yeah,
Alan,
I don't think he carries all the weight of it. I think it is
yeah,
hard to separate him from it though. And
no, you can't. You can't.
I'll even put this to my favorite athlete of all time is Michael Jordan. As a lifelong Bulls fan, Jordan's my favorite athlete of all time. I think you can argue though Michael Jordan is also responsible for a lot of the crap that we have that happens in the NBA now. And then if you go back before Michael Jordan, there was no individual shoe brands for players. The teams were what you followed. The games were a little bit more competitive. The players certainly weren't taking half the season. And Jordan didn't do any of those things himself. But
Yeah.
where Jordan changed the league is it went from it's the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers and the Chicago Bulls to it's Michael Jordan versus the New York Knicks. It became an individual league. And if you look at the NBA now, when you watch a matchup, they no longer go Lakers versus Warriors. It's LeBron James versus Steph Curry. It's this player versus this player, with the other characters and the other actors and the other players on the team treated like they're the has-beens or the add-ons to it. And it's hard because all of that starts with Jordan. Now, again, Jordan, I think greatest player of all time. I don't think Michael Jordan did any of the things that the modern players did, but he absolutely changed the NBA from where it was a we the team brand to a me the superstar brand. Even if he himself didn't really do that, he got the ball rolling on that. And I think that's the thing with Alan Moore is why I can't hand a copy of the latest Batman comic to my young kid. I think you have to look at a lot of that's Alan Moore. And again, does that mean he's responsible for the current DC editorial people who don't remember that, hey, Batman's ostensibly a child's figure where a kid should be able to pick it up and read it? No, he's not responsible for that, but he did get the ball rolling. And
Yeah.
I think the harder part that I struggle with him on, Frank Miller told dark stories, for sure. But Frank Miller loved the characters that he wrote. When you
Yeah.
read Frank Miller's stuff, he always gets compared to Alan Moore, and I honestly hate that comparison
Yeah, I
because
don't like
Frank
it
Miller's
either.
Batman is dark, but there's no question when you read it, Frank Miller loved Batman. Frank Miller's Wolverine stuff that he did, dark, he loved Wolverine. That story with Claremont's amazing. His Daredevil is dark, is serious, but he loved Matt Murdock as a character. Even
Yeah.
the characters like Karen Page, where he takes him to a really dark place. If you read Daredevil Born Again, that character's in a really dark place. There was a redemptive arc that showed he cared about the character. And at the end, when Miller touched something, it was in a better place than when he picked it up. I feel like with Alan Moore, I can't say comics are better for him being in it. I really can't. And I don't know that he ever really cared about that. I think, like you said, he wrote what he wanted to write, and there's some respect to that of, hey, man, you're a creative, write what you want to write. But I do think it makes his legacy complicated. It seems like this guy who's so defined comic books really didn't particularly care about the superheroes of Marvel and DC that so were impacted by him. It's interesting. He's a complex figure. I'd be interested to see what folks' thoughts are on below. It's interesting.
I think there's a lot of irony there because, he wrote the way he wrote, um, and the genre as a whole was diametrically different, and he took it there. The whole industry didn't have to follow him, but they did, and
Mhm.
and we did too. And
No,
and so I think, like characters like Batman and others that got written really super dark. I just think it's kind of unfortunate that it lasted as long as it did. Because it's cool to see the dark side, and we want that kind of black label edge every once in a while.
I mean
Uh,
one of his most famous works, right? Killing Joke, which is probably the darkest Batman story
ooh boy.
that's ever told, and it's interesting because that always gets yeah. That's the weird thing with him is like, look, I think the Killing Joke's a great comic, I really do. when people hold that up as like the best Batman story, I'm like, no way, man. Year one, Long Halloween, like I don't think, and I think that's just the interesting part with Alan Moore is I think it's hard to really appreciate some of what he did, and it's so negative. But the weird part, like you said, if someone asked me today, Reed, what's the greatest comic book story of all time? I probably, with not much hesitation, would go, it's Watchmen, and he's the brainchild behind it. So he's a complex figure, man, as far as comic books. I would just be
But
interested. What do people think? Go ahead, Mike.
we are challenging the Watchmen with, 9 or 10 other
Nine or ten
volumes of the movie.
others, absolutely.
We're trying to see how it stands up against that, and
Well, and I'll say
having a
this,
lot of
even
fun with
though I
it.
have a ton of respect for Watchmen, and if you ask me what's the best, I'd say
Yeah,
Watchmen. However, it's kind of like if you ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, that's a different answer than what the best is. Right.
yeah,
It's the best movie, you could argue something like Citizen Kane, things like that. Again, those might be the best movies from a technical standpoint and an acting performance standpoint. It's not my favorite. Typically, our favorites are, I'm under no illusions that Top Gun is the greatest movie of all time. It is my favorite.
yeah,
It's cheesy. It's got all kinds of things that got plot holes and stuff in it. But man, I love that freaking movie, and it's fun.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think that is a little bit too of Watchmen. Is like, look, when I read Watchmen, I absolutely look at it and go, amazing. It's also
yeah.
not the most fun. Like, it's a different experience when I read something like The New Frontier or The Long Halloween or something like that, where it's like, man, that was a fun comic and it was really good. And so I think it's a complex place they're at. Let us know though, folks. What do you think down below? What do you think of the legacy of Alan Moore? Again, if you agree with us, disagree with us, let us know. We're not here to tell you you're right or wrong. Just wanted to see what you guys think down below. As always, thank you for watching. God bless you. We will catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.